All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Daniel Mastra. I'm a missionary with Christ for the City International. Our communications director, Nick, contacted me and asked me to do a quick update for everybody from our base here in El Salvador, where I'm located, along with a brief Bible study. And so, as everybody's taking the time, to get into the live video, I do just want to mention, how things are going here before we get into the Bible study. So as of late March, the government here in El Salvador made a decision in light of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic that's sweeping the globe, to put the country on lockdown, which essentially means that everybody is required to maintain uh, their time indoors in their house, to stay inside, to stay at home. With some exceptions, of course, you got to be able to go to the grocery store or the pharmacy or things like that. But for the most part, everything has been shut down since March. And so as a result, we're about 2 months now of kind of being on standstill. But in the meantime, during that time period, there has, of course, been a lot of need here in El Salvador as well as all over the world, with people not being able to work, not necessarily having the savings to sustain suspended shutdown. And so we've made it a goal as a base here in El Salvador to give out food, basic food items to 1,000 families. And I do have some photos that I would like to share with you guys from some of those distributions. Uh, Thank you so much to everybody that's given. If you are somebody that has already given to help with that, we really appreciate it. A lot of these kids, by the way, that you see in the photos are from our child sponsorship program. And so in addition to receiving the food baskets, a lot of these kids are receiving scholarships from Christ for the City provided by sponsors, such as maybe some of you who are watching this video, to be able to study at a Christian school called Siloé. And it's a really awesome program that I'm blessed to be a part of. And so thank you so much to everybody who has helped support that program, and also to everybody who has taken it upon themselves to help with providing for the food during this time. We really appreciate that. If you have a Bible, you can turn to Luke chapter 10. If you don't have a Bible, you can get one real quick or pull it up on your phone. I want to share briefly from a passage of scripture that several years ago really caught my attention. And ever since then, it's been a passage that has always challenged me a lot. So to kind of set the scene for what we're about to read, in Luke chapter 10, Jesus is going about doing his itinerant ministry like he did all throughout the Gospels. And we arrive at this point in time at which Jesus finds himself at the home of two sisters called Mary and Martha, who are two of the most prominent women in Jesus' ministry that are mentioned in the Gospels at least. And so we find Jesus in this passage that we're about to read in the home of Mary and Martha as their guest. And starting out in verse 38, Luke 10:38, we read, "As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, 'Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me.' 'Martha, Martha,' the Lord answered, 'you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her.'" This is a passage of scripture that's very brief. It's not extremely long. It's not extremely complex by any means whatsoever. And every time that I read this passage, I find myself relating most to Martha. I don't know about you, but my personality is such that I like to feel productive. I like to have a checklist. I like to be getting stuff done. And Martha strikes me as that type of person. You can see in the passage that she's focused on every little detail of Jesus' stay, trying to make sure that Jesus had the best stay possible. And what's interesting about Martha is if you actually read the passage and examine and think about it, what she's doing isn't bad. It's actually not even neutral. You could really say that it's a good thing that Martha's doing. She's taking the time to try to make sure that Jesus has the best stay possible. She's serving Jesus. She's, you could say, doing ministry. Uh, and for that reason, she expected that Mary would pull her weight as well. It's interesting that she actually goes to Jesus to try to recruit him to go to bat for her with her sister Mary, and basically approaches Jesus and says, "Hey, can you please tell Mary that she's got to help too? I can't be the only one doing this." And she, of course, expected that Jesus would be on her side. If not, she would never have gone to Jesus in the first place. But what we see in the passage is that Jesus actually highlights Mary over Martha. And again, it's not to say that what Martha was doing was bad. As we already stated, Martha was doing a good thing. It's just that what she was doing, although good, was not nearly as good as what Mary was doing, which was simply sitting at Jesus' feet, not really worrying about any details of the stay, not really doing anything for Jesus to enhance his experience at their home, really just sitting there and spending time with Jesus. And what we see from that passage and what we learn, the lesson that we can learn from that, is that it is more important to be with God than to do things for God. In other words, it is more important to live with God than it is to live for God. And I'm going to break down what I mean by that. But this is something that we see not only in this passage, but we see this actually all throughout Scripture. As an example, if you look at 1 Samuel chapter 15, you'll see a story where King Saul is famously rejected as king. And what's interesting, if you go and read that passage later on your own time, you can check it out. You'll see that Samuel, the prophet Samuel, approaches Saul because Saul has completely disobeyed a command that Samuel had prophetically given him regarding how he was to conduct a particular battle in which he was going to be leading the Israelite army. And what Saul says when he's confronted by Samuel after completely disobeying and disregarding God's command is basically, "Samuel, what's the problem? I'm doing this for God. In fact, the reason why I did the things that I did is so that we would have the ability to give a greater sacrifice to God." In other words, Saul thinks that he's living for God. He thinks that what he's doing for God. But Samuel very quickly sets him straight and says, "No, you missed the entire point. The point is not that you do something for God that you think you need to get done for God. The point is that you have a relationship with God and that you're obedient to God and that you heed what he has to say and the principles that he wants to put in place in your life." And ultimately, if you're familiar with the passage, as many are, if you've grown up in the church or if you've been a Christian for many years, you know that Saul, at the end of that passage, is rejected as king. You can contrast that with Moses. Read one of my favorite passages from the story of Moses, from the whole life of Moses, is Exodus chapter 33. And again, we're not going to read the passage itself right now. You're welcome to go and check it out. Once this video ends, I invite you to do that. But just kind of give a summary. We're at this point in the story of Israel at which Moses has been up on Mount Sinai, receiving the commands from God that were going to be given to the people, including the Ten Commandments most famously, but a whole lot of other commands beyond that. And in the middle of this incredible, one-of-a-kind conversation that Moses is having with God, God interrupts in chapter 32 and he says, "Moses, you got to get back down to the people because they're doing some crazy stuff down there." And as it turns out, the people had constructed a golden calf and were beginning to worship that calf. So Moses in chapter 32, he goes down the mountain, he addresses the situation, he tries to set the people straight, and then he comes back up to Mount Sinai because they really hadn't finished the conversation. And even furthermore, on the way down the mountain, Moses was so enraged that he completely shattered the tablets with all the commands that God had just given him. So he did have to go back up again the mountain to reinitiate the conversation, to get the laws and the precepts that God had given him that he had just shattered, and also, of course, finish off what was left. And so Moses goes back up Mount Sinai, and in Exodus chapter 33, he has a conversation with God. And God basically says, Moses, I can't deal with this anymore. Like, this is too much. I can't be dealing with these people. And so he says, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to appoint you to lead the people. You guys are still going to go to the promised land. I'll provide all the blessings that I had promised ahead of time, and I'll get you there. I'll get you there safely. I'll make sure that you guys get what you need. I'll take care of you, basically. But I'm not going. I'm staying, and you guys got to go without me. And Moses says something very interesting in this passage. And what Moses says in response is, God, if you don't go with us, then we don't want to go. At least I don't want to go. Moses says, I would rather be stuck here in the middle of nowhere where we have nothing but manna to eat and we're struggling to get water and we're having all these problems because we're in the middle of the wilderness. But I'd rather be here with you than go to a land of incredible abundance, the blessing that we've been dreaming about for years, but not have you with us. Moses understood something that Mary also understood, and that is that God's presence, that being with God, is more important than any task that you could possibly do for God. Moses had the mentality of Mary, whereas King Saul had the mentality of Martha. And so what I want to encourage you, kind of concluding, during this season, we're obviously in a point in time and in a place where for many of us, we're not able to do the things that we were accustomed to doing prior to this pandemic taking place. Many of us are working from home or out of work completely, and we don't find ourselves in a position where we're able to maintain the level of productivity that we had before. We're not able to serve necessarily in the same capacity in church as some of you may have done before. And we find ourselves we're really without choice, you could say, not able to be Martha. We're not able to go about doing all these tasks. But what I want to encourage us tonight, and this is the closing thought that I'll leave with everybody, is let's take advantage of this opportunity that we have to adopt the mentality of Mary and to focus on reigniting some of those spiritual disciplines in our lives that maybe we had slacked off on and maybe we just hadn't made the time for prior. Anything that we can do for God pales in comparison to being with God. In other words, anything that you can do, whether it's for ministry, whether it's for your church, whether it's for your job, whether it's for your community, etc., it pales in importance to having a healthy relationship with God, to knowing God in a very real and very deep and a very personal way. And when you know God, when you take the time to have that strong relationship with God, all of those other tasks that you were worried about, all those other Martha things that you were worried about, it'll naturally fall into place. Because living for God is encompassed within living with God, but not necessarily the other way around. And so let's take the time during the season to get on a Bible reading plan, to craft out time every day, to be spending time in prayer, maybe even to fast on occasion if that's something that you're not comfortable with or that you've never done before. I would encourage you to explore it. It's definitely a biblical way to draw closer to God. And those are just some practical things. And so I want to encourage you with that and leave you with that. Just as a side note, if you do need a Bible reading plan, feel free to shoot me a message or leave it in the comments. We have a Bible reading program that we do right here at our ministry in El Salvador, primarily in the prison ministry, which is where I work. We have several Bible reading plans on the life of Jesus, on stories from the Old Testament, on the epistles. And so, if there's any of that interests you and you want a copy, feel free to shoot me a message, or like I said, leave a comment. But let me pray for everybody that's watching this video, and then we'll close it out. God, thank you so much for the opportunity that you've given us this evening to study your word, to take a look at a passage of scripture that really is relevant to us in this season. I pray you would have your hand on our lives, on every person that's watching this. Thank you so much for their commitment to you, for their support for Christ for the City, for all the ministries that are able to take place as a result of their prayers, of their giving, etc. And so thank you God so much for this evening. Pray you have your hand on everyone's lives as we continue on with our night. In the name of Jesus, amen. Well, that's everything that I have for tonight. And so God bless. Stay safe, everybody. And I hope that you guys continue to tune in every night that Christ for the City has a video like this. And so continue to check us out and have a great night. Bye.